Well, John, dude, thank you for being here. Always a pleasure. I don't even know where to start with you today because there's been so much news that we could catch up on because we haven't spoken in a while. A couple things that you wrote about and talked about on your channel and also on the blackvault.org.
.com.
.com. Okay, blackvault.com. Sorry. I was thinking of a different website. I was thinking of the debrief because I got war bubbles in my head. Anyway, I guess let's start with the biggest news because this is something that Rather and I and Jane have sort of been obviously talking about, the NDAA, the Gillibrand Amendment,
Sure.
co-sponsored by Rubio. I haven't been able to talk to you about it. So I guess what are the first things that John Greenewald finds exciting about the bill? I know it still hasn't been voted on, which is kind of nerve-wracking. Hopefully we'll get a resolution to this by this week. But what are your initial thoughts on it? And then I want to get into the AOI MSG aspect of these things.
Sure. So in short, I tackle it a couple different ways in my head, and I'll start with the exciting part first. It's exciting to see that language start getting floated around. I've been around the block researching all sorts of government secrets, including UFOs, for a long time. It's not every day that you get to see what you love researching now start to be bantered about, in the halls of Congress and on the Senate floor and so on. And obviously in the last couple of years, we're starting to see that with UFOs, or what they call UAPs. This new amendment, look, I'm excited. I think it's going to be awesome if it passes. I am on the fence on whether or not I believe it will pass the way that Gillibrand has been talking about it and wanting the level of transparency that she does. And let me preface it by saying I fully support that transparency. So I'm not knocking it at all. But rather, the Department of Defense and the Pentagon, as we all know, has been incredibly secretive about this topic for decades upon decades. And whether or not we're talking about secret Russian technology, secret Chinese, Iranian, even American technology, or alien technology, it doesn't matter. We can easily prove that it is a national security issue, and we can prove that with evidence. So can a congressional mandate start requiring a level of transparency that would make you, me, and all of your viewers happy? And my gut feeling is no. I believe that there will be a certain level of transparency, but it would be very much like the report that came out earlier this year. We got a little, but we sure didn't get a lot. And I think that that's what we're going to have to wrestle with, because we're going to have our wants and desires and what we really hope this is going to be. But in reality, it's probably not. And it's for the bitter truth and reality that there is a big national security issue when it comes to the UAP topic. And why that is, well, we all have guesses, but we're not really sure. But regardless, that national security is going to trump any push for transparency. But again, I don't want to say it's going to be squashed. I'm just going to say I don't think it's going to be at the level that's being bantered about right now.
So let me ask you this. If the bill passes as written, you don't think that the offices are going to have enough power to extract the data they're looking for, even for, if, let's just say, for a classified setting?
Sure.
And do you think that has a shot at filtering itself into, I mean, I can't imagine. And I like how you set expectations, because I think that's what we really have to do here is just manage our expectations. Let's put the bar super low. So that way, I mean, for me, the report was wonderful that we got in June. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really great insight into sort of how they're cataloging these things, and that there is an other folder.
And the Department of Energy was in it, John. I remember in an interview earlier, I asked you what department you wish you would get all the files from if you could. And I think I asked you that before the report came out, and it was included as one of the agencies in the report. Were you happy that it was included, or is it just, I mean, do you think we'll get more from the Department of Energy? Now?
I would say that was I happy? I was happy to see the number of agencies listed in the report. If memory serves, I think it was like 13. They listed 14, but one was duplicated. But it was something like 13 different agencies, including the DOE. That's encouraging. That means that they really did branch out when they created that report and really started pulling resources from all the different agencies. And that should have been happening for, decades on this topic, because documentation proves that this phenomena has been well documented post Project Blue Book. And prior to December of 2017, that was my whole spiel. I mean, with ample evidence showing they were still interested in UFOs, still highly classified, and throughout every corner of the government. So to see the report kind of bring all those corners of the government together, including a few that have denied interest in UFOs and have denied they have intel on UFOs, they were in there as well. So that's why in one of the past shows, I believe I've done here on UCR, but I think with you as well, Jane, when we talked about the report on your show, is that spawned 50 other requests within about 3 or 4 days, and I just went line by line to 13 different agencies requesting all sorts of information, because what that report did, although it didn't give us a lot of actual answers, it gave people like me leads to start pursuing other things. Because once you have an official document that solidifies the existence of something, the NRO can't come back and say, oh, we got nothing on UAPs, when they're listed as contributing to a UAP report. Now, the NRO has told me that in the past. They have nothing on UAPs. It's not their scope. It's not their interest. They have nothing. Now, post this report, I don't believe they can get away with saying that again. If they wrote a letter to the UAP task force or ODNI and said, oh yeah, sorry, we got nothing. Okay, fine. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. But I think that once you have it in writing, this is my point, you can't go back. You can't say those 13 agencies that are listed in the report as having contributed to the report now have nothing on UAPs. You don't contribute when you have nothing. And so that, I believe, was the encouraging part for me, because as a researcher, that those are leads, each and every one of them, and it's branched out. And I can tell you, those 50 cases are being processed, but also I am touching base with ODNI pretty much on a weekly basis, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, on a weekly basis on my MDR case, to get the classified version. What they say is a 17-page classified version that was given to the Senate, declassified, whether it be in part, long shot in whole, but I'm hoping that case will be resolved. But it's very hard to lock any agency down on an ETA, but that is still ongoing.
Matthew Rife with the $5 donation. Thank you so much. He says disclosure's just around the corner since the 1950s.
Yeah.
And I can understand that frustration. But I mean, is it fair to say that this legislation that has been proposed is the most comprehensive bill that's ever been written on the UAP topic?
I would say so. Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of facets to it. And this is where I think that there's going to be some changes, and it's the sharing of the information with the private sector. And I believe that by the time this is all said and done, that will be diminished a bit. And the reason I say that is, again, the national security risk. You cannot forego national security in the interest of transparency. There are exceptions to the rule when they've tried to be transparent, but the JFK assassination is a prime example to prove my point. And that is, President Trump went in to drain the swamp, to turn things upside down. And if he could light a fuse to see an explosion, he would light it. And whether you liked him or not, that was who he was as a president. And he goes in and he says, I'm going to release everything. I have approved the full release of all the JFK files. And people like me were incredibly excited. I've researched that for years, and there's people that are much smarter than me that have researched it for much longer. And we were finally going to see these documents. And what happened? Despite the politician who wanted to turn things upside down, even the will and desire of a president who had the capability of doing it, national security won in the end. President Trump agreed with the withholding of the couple thousand, I forget the number, but the couple thousand pages of documents, or a couple thousand documents, I should say, an untold number of pages, and to keep them secret. He agreed with that. So national security trumped Trump. And so his desire to get all that stuff out went away. And so that is my prime example that it doesn't matter how much transparency we want as the people. It doesn't matter how much transparency the representatives of the people want. National security will win. So at what point will they start saying no? And I think that sharing a lot of data with the private sector and scientists and nonprofit organizations and Avi Loeb and all those efforts, I think that would be great. I'm 100% on board with that. Will the military do it in full? And my gut would say no. And it's because I think you have a couple, not to go off on a tangent here, but I think you have a couple facets of the UFO phenomena at play here. I believe that there is a certain percentage of military involvement. And that's not to say that's 100%, but what I'm saying is there is a percentage. And I do believe that there are possibilities that naval aviators, Air Force pilots, they are seeing potentially our own technology in some cases. Can I please stress in some cases before people start tweeting nasty things at me? That's a small percentage. We can't get away from that. In the same respect, I think the phenomena produces something that truly is unknown. Might be a small percentage, but it's a percentage nonetheless. And I think it confuses the government, the military. They have no answers. And that in itself is a national security risk. So when you start sharing that data, right, from either camp there of potential classified technology or we're clueless, you expose weaknesses to the world. You expose what we couldn't track or couldn't identify. Right. So those scientists, if they come out and they go, okay, so the Navy saw something off the coast of Florida in 2015, they're completely clueless. But here at Harvard University, we're researching it. That all sounds great. Meanwhile, Russia's over there going, man, that was us. And they have no idea. And so that's where the national security implication is. Now, again, I stress it. I'll beat the dead horse. That doesn't mean every case is top secret technology, classified technology, or our enemies flying off our coast. But it's definitely part of it. And that's where I think that this is going to get very muddy very quickly when the Senate wants answers and they're advocating for transparency, and the military is going to say, yeah, right. And they're going to have to find a kind of a happy medium.
They don't, but I mean, just to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, and Rodrigo, we're going to get to your question soon, I promise you. I wrote it down this way we don't forget, but I just want to stay on track here. They don't have to be that honest, right? Like, couldn't they just reveal the information that we already know to be quote unquote fact? Like, we know there's a there. We know that our pilots have chased these things. Couldn't they give us a lot of information without being tied to national security at all? I mean, it doesn't even need to be a lot. It could be a little. And I think it could be just as non, I guess, explosive or sensational as the June report. It could be as simple as that, just with more details and more ways to verify that these things in the sky are actually there.
And I think that that's the happy medium. And I think you're right. And I think that that's going to be the happy medium to the national security apparatus of them controlling the narrative and only sharing a percentage, and albeit a small one, if at all, but a small percentage of what they really have. Of course, the ideal situation would be that they would share all the data. And I believe that that's
wouldn't that also be a national security? So let's say that there's some real theories, right, that they have about aliens, right? Wouldn't that be a national security concern to share that with the public, right? Because you're also sharing ideas maybe about how to reverse engineer a craft, right, with a foreign enemy. So couldn't even just bullet points of how we think it works, couldn't that be something they could justify not making transparent?
Yeah, it gets into what is the definition of national security, and would they consider the mere talk or the possibility of alien life a national security risk? I believe the implications of that, the answer is yes. And the implications of it would be the fact that the United States doesn't have control over things anymore. They're not the number one in the world. You have a lot of stuff that goes along with the reality, let's say it really is there, of an alien life. Or if the military is saying we don't know if aliens are there, but that's top on our list and definitely still there, again, those implications then start to come into play, where America is not the strongest as we want to be. We're not the most powerful. We don't traverse the stars. So it's not necessarily the idea of aliens, but it's what the idea of aliens brings with it that, again, this is just an opinion, but it's that idea of what aliens bring with it that's the national security implication. And that, I believe, is the concern. I remember quite a few years ago, I was on with George Norrie on his television series when he was doing that. And George had asked me, what do you believe that the fear is? And I remember saying that the government is afraid to say that they don't know. I believe that they are clueless on a lot of this stuff. I can't tell you the flack that I got for that, because people want to believe that the government is this all-knowing entity and they have all the answers and they're hiding the truth from us. And the truth is that aliens are here. And I'll be honest with you and say, I don't think that that's really true. I think that they are completely clueless on a certain percentage of this phenomena. And that in itself is a national security concern, because when you come out with that and you tell the people that you lead for so many years that you're number one, then all of a sudden aliens are, aliens are in existence and they're here and they're real. You're not number one anymore. And that's where a national security concern really comes into play. So of course it's speculation at this point, but I think that that's a huge possibility.
Rather, did you have any questions? I didn't want to cut you off there.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, it kind of seems like the government will never give us the truth unless they know the truth. So it's kind of a catch-22, it seems like. But they have told us that they've almost ruled out the Russian and the Chinese as these things being adversaries, the others. So do you think that is that a national security risk? Because they're kind of almost saying that we are not number one, that there are these things in the sky that we don't can't identify.
You bring up an excellent point, and I won't argue with that. What I would say, maybe even playing devil's advocate with myself, is the counterintelligence value also to the UAP phenomena. And to me, and again, this is just speculation, but I wonder if they're starting to play with that a little bit, that the decades upon decades of lying to the people and saying we have no interest and blah, 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 we know the story, and that UFOs aren't real, that didn't work. Look, people like me didn't go away. We're still having that conversation. So what if they flip it? What if they go, okay, now we can utilize this. What will outweigh potentially the national security risk to say, we're not number one anymore. We're not necessarily the most powerful, but will the counterintelligence value on a global scale outweigh that? And I believe that that is something that's being toyed with. I really do, because if you start misleading the world and you start playing the card of, we don't know what this is and we're ruling out Russia and China, what if we as America know that part of it is, and what if Russia and China is going, are they playing a game? Right. Like, is this something that they really don't know, or do they? So I know that I'm kind of contradicting myself, but I do actually wrestle with those two ideas in my head, because
I gotta say that makes the most sense to me.
It makes the most sense, yeah. And I would say if I went back 15 years, obviously the conversation is different. Obviously, I wouldn't be saying it, 15 years ago as I would be now. But everything has changed. A lot of things have changed, and this counterintelligence value is something that we have to consider. That doesn't mean that everything is explainable, but they can bring that phenomena as a whole, whatever percentage is explainable, couple that with the percentage that's not, and use it. And use that to deter our enemies and friends alike on what American intelligence agencies really know or really don't know. And that's what counterintelligence is all about. That is the definition of counterintelligence. It's to make sure that your enemy just doesn't know what you know and doesn't have any idea.
And if they are trying to pass off our tech as potential, unknown UFO alien types kind of stuff, it would be a lot easier to do that if there was a real unknown phenomenon. Wouldn't you say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. You use both percentages of what's explainable and not, all in your toolbox. And that's where I believe the power of this counterintelligence effort could be. And I'll keep stressing it's speculation, but I think that when you look at how the government treats the issue and how some agencies say one thing and another agency will contradict it, and then all of a sudden politicians are getting classified briefings. If they're interested in transparency, where are the efforts to really inform the people? And I kind of laughed. I thought the one quote the other day that I saw where he was oh gosh, now I'm drawing a blank on who was on the House floor, but he's thank you. I'm sorry, I drew a blank, but he's essentially on the House floor saying we should have transparency, and I'm paraphrasing here, but transparency, come let us know what you know, and he wanted a classified briefing. It's like, well, there's not much transparency to that. It's just you get to know, and my whole point is that these classified briefings happen. What happens after? None of us really get told what they are told. And secrecy has triumphed throughout the last couple of years of those briefings that we know about. And that includes the NASA director, that includes some senators, that includes a high list of people. And they haven't come out and said, okay, guys, aliens top on the list. They just kind of keep, saying the normal generic lines, but they don't tell us what's really going on in these classified briefings. Will that change with this amendment passing? In my opinion, no, not the meat of the story. And then that's going back to my point about how national security trumps desires for transparency.
If there is a bit of this, counterintelligence going on, do you think that would be exposed to the senators and Congress in these classified briefings? And if so, do you think that potentially these bills that are being passed are part of that, or do you think they're as in the dark as we are, and that's they're kind of being the wool over their eyes by the IC as well?
Yes, it could be a little bit of everything. I mean, obviously, senators are cleared with their respective committees to hear certain things that you and I cannot. And so if they're publicly stating one thing and they have these classified briefings and then realize, hey, look, there's actually much more to the story here, but we can't share it. That's absolutely a possibility that they are getting read in, so to speak, on part of the counterintelligence value to this. In the same respect, there is that percentage of unknowns. We know that by the report. That's not speculation. So they could absolutely brief them in and say, this is the counterintelligence effort. This is what's going on. We do have a portion that we have no idea what this is. And here's our national security concerns about this as well. So that absolutely can be part of these particular briefings. The inclusion of NASA is super intriguing to me. I got I'm not sure if we ever talked about this story on your show before, but I had written about documents that I got that exposed how the UAP task force, within like the first month of them becoming an entity, they reached out to NASA, and at the UAP task force's request said, we want to brief you guys on what we know about UFOs and UAPs. Now, why is that important? Well, number one, NASA, if the UAP task force was only concerned about military training range incursions, then why would NASA have to be involved with that? It sounds cool, but why would they need to know? NASA's vision is somewhere else. Now, granted, they do have instrumentation pointed towards Earth, and maybe there's a way for them to share data in that respect if they've got a camera or some kind of sensor that's pointed towards a military installation, that if there's some kind of phenomena over that particular base, NASA can share it. That's fine. What was interesting was the International Space Station director was requested to be within that briefing, and he was. So when you look at that, it's like, okay, are they really just kind of staying above military ranges? Or is this something that they've been looking at on a much broader scale, even going into, let's say, space station sightings? And we all know the stories. There's quite a few of them about, NASA seeing things on their cameras and they cut the feed. And a lot of those are sometimes a little bit hokey. But are they seeing things?
It happens a lot.
It happens a lot. Exactly. I mean, once or twice you can dismiss it as a coincidence, but so many times it's happened, there's got to be something there. So for the UAP task forces, for one of their first orders of business in the first month, reach out to NASA, brief the International Space Station director and a select other people, one of which I looked into and wrote about him. He was formerly a scientist with BASS. So weird coincidence there, whether or not there's any kind of connection. But he was now with NASA, formerly with BASS, as we all know, got the contract with OSAP. So there's all these little connections, including the NASA director who was briefed this last August. And that also was unknown, and I got the Pentagon to confirm it did take place. They did not confirm that the director was there, but I had the documentation to prove it. So,
well, and you were also, you also, NASA was involved, I believe, because I was looking into Project Moon Dust, I think, in the Kecksburg, Pennsylvania meteor / UFO, and you were part of those FOIA requests. I think NASA got involved with that as well. So that's another example that was a pretty prominent, popular UFO sighting that NASA kind of debunked. I can't remember where they landed with that, but
yeah, the connection with me and the NASA files was that I went after the fragology, what are called fragology files. Now this I don't want to take credit for it. It stems from a sci-fi channel.
It helped me with my research. I cannot tell you how many times you have enabled me to continue to do research. How many stones you've already unturned, and then I can look on another one, so many times.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's awesome to hear. That NASA connection to what they called the fragology files stemmed from a sci-fi channel lawsuit, and years later, which as we sit right now is about a year or two ago, I went after all the documents related to that court case. So the fragology files, which were rumored to have something to do with objects that came in from space, potentially about Kecksburg, but maybe a lot more, they were lost. They couldn't find them. They found the material that went over to the National Archives, but somehow the boxes mysteriously disappeared. Sci-Fi Channel did the lawsuit with Leslie Kean many years ago, and they essentially, I don't know if you call it a loss or a win, but the files were gone, so they were never turned up. So with the NASA request that I did, I was looking for all the documents that were created or that were pertaining to that court case, and a lot of Project Moondust files came up that I had never seen before. And I kind of searched a couple resources that I knew of. I looked at the documents I had got. They had never appeared before. So there was kind of some gold in there, even though the fragology files were gone. NASA had these Project Moondust files, which are, pretty tough to find. So that was kind of a fun aspect to it. But NASA, I think, has more of a connection to UFOs and UAPs than I think that we're led on. And one hint, I guess I'll drop you, is you'll probably see in the next week or so an internal NASA PowerPoint presentation that came out through FOIA on how they were going to utilize the UAP news essentially for their benefit. And it was very interesting to see how much in this particular PowerPoint presentation was redacted. And for NASA to have that is kind of interesting. So the story's still unfolding, but you'll probably see that, I would say, in the next week or so.
Interesting. Let me ask you this. Can we speculate for a moment, John?
I love speculating.
Great. What is the best possible outcome that you see if this Gillibrand Amendment is passed? What would be... Yeah, I guess the best outcome. What can you see happening that would be significant if all the chips fall in place, and would it be more opening up the FOIA request for you? Would it be certain videos, or what kind of data? What would be the goal for John Greenewald if this bill was able to produce not the bodies or the craft, but what's short of that? What could we get that might change this conversation on a national level at the water cooler? And then the opposite of that, I guess a two-part question would be, what's the worst that could happen if this NDAA is signed into law as is?
So the best thing that happens is what Gillibrand has proposed, and that is sharing of data to the scientific community, get it out of the hands of the government, into the private sector, into scientific minds that are much smarter than me, and to those that could analyze it properly and see what the government has. The problem, again, I won't repeat what I've already said, but the problem with that, though, is they also expose their capabilities to the scientific community. And that's why I struggle on if that best case scenario will happen, because that data collection is obviously going to be from highly sensitive systems that are collecting the data. That in itself, maybe it's not collecting anything interesting, but the capability of collecting that data is potentially part of that secrecy. So not trying to dampen the best case scenario, but that would be the best case scenario, is if they could share everything. The worst case scenario,
I mean, would there be, I guess not worst case scenario, but I guess the managed expectations scenario.
Yeah.
The thing that you think will happen if this law does pass. And then real quick, I mean, don't you think there's a way to omit the process and give us the meat of it, the juicy meat, without giving us the censored data, without giving us the camera system? Is it possible for science to look at those things without, breaking national security?
I think it depends on the type of data. I mean, are you talking about radar? Are you talking about visual imagery? Are you talking about, reconnaissance, satellite capabilities? This is, and I don't want to be a broken record, but this is the biggest issue and concern that I have about the UAP transparency push in the way that it's written right now, why I fear that it will get beaten down because of this. And it's the exposure of sensitive technology. Can you strip that away and just go to the data? In my opinion, it does really depend on the data itself, but not really, because, it's like, if I don't tell you that I took a photo with my iPhone, 13, but I give you the photo, you now know the capability and the resolution and how, good my camera is. And you can start to work backwards and figure out what camera I potentially have, right? It's a very simplistic way to look at it, but that's kind of where I'm going with it. I didn't tell you my camera, and I didn't tell you where I was. I just gave you the photo and told you, try and figure this out. But there are certain things for you as an intelligence analyst to figure out my camera. And again, that capability. So it's very hard when you're talking about the data that we would want to see, videos, photos, that would potentially encroach on a sensitive piece of equipment. If it was just taken by an iPhone, by a pilot or whatever, sure, that's neat. So there's really nothing classified about that. So is that the data that's going to be shared? I will also just bring this up. What, and bear with me here, because I don't want to get the hate mail. I saw Jazz Shaw in the chat room saying that he was already tweeting nasty comments at me, which I fully believe, actually. But if there is this counterintelligence effort, and I don't want this to come off as conspiratorial, but if there really is a CI effort to all of this, and that they are using the phenomena, imagine if they do let this pass and share, quote unquote, all the information, but all of the data that they know is solvable. And so they have the aura of transparency and they push all that data out, but never telling the scientists, okay, we've determined this was a balloon. The stuff that leaked, I'm anxious to see if the government really thinks that some of those latter ones from Jeremy Corbell, who I have openly thanked for, giving material that actually checked out. So he should get credit for that. But they never went on the record to say it was UAP. So my question is, were they? In the same respect, could they give data like that over to the Avi Loebs and those scientists who really do have a concern over this and want to figure it out? And the government uses that as part of their effort, and they go, "Here you guys go." And with
isn't there
full
evidence
knowledge
that
they'll figure it out.
Isn't there evidence that has maybe happened with MUFON, and existing organizations, right? Didn't Robert Bigelow get a contract with MUFON, right? And get some of that data, right? So I just think I'm just supporting, or there's evidence already, right, that it could go in that direction.
And I have to give some love to Jimmy Church, who's in your chat room.
Gotta say hello to him.
Yeah, love Jimmy. So in regards to the MUFON thing, that to me is a very different topic. And
Yeah, you do, Jimmy. I got to send you my address, buddy. I'll message you after this show.
So it's a very different topic because it's the sharing from a private nonprofit organization of data that was submitted to them, for the most part, from people that didn't know it would go right back to the government, and even through a contractor. So for me, I very much question that story is long from over. I am shocked more people don't start asking questions about how that played out. I mean, I'm sorry that when you submit your information to an entity who then sells it to the U.S. government, especially a UFO organization, there's a lot of questions that should be asked. There was no fine print at the time. There later was fine print added, but there was no fine print that they could just sell the data. And so that to me is a very untapped segment of this story that I think people aren't asking enough questions about. But be that as it may, I mean, did MUFON get utilized by the U.S. government? To be honest with you, I don't know how much the MUFON data played a role. I really don't know how much that went into the government.
I guess sometimes when I look at MUFON reports, right? I'm not one of the main field investigators, right? So I don't know any of the witness information. Anybody can submit it, right? So a government agent can submit something.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right?
So yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, the vetting, and I'm not here to bash MUFON. There's a lot of people.
I use MUFON regularly. Because
the only thing I would add is I don't know how much vetting goes into. I know they have a training program and so on and so forth, but I've seen a lot of MUFON cases get disseminated as being a UFO or UAP that are clearly either like a lens flare situation or something to that effect. And it's like, okay, so who is MUFON putting their name on it? I'm not really sure. I know that there's a lot of reports that are done that don't necessarily all get shared with the general public. I'm always an advocate for transparency, so I don't know why. I'm not really sure why that is, and that's always been kind of a concern of mine. But back to what you were saying, Jane, yeah, anybody can submit the information, and it goes into a database, and no one really knows, who the submitter is. So it can be, anything from anyone. And that's what's very difficult this day and age, because people can hide. We have to respect anonymity, which I do fully. So we have to wrestle with respecting anonymity with the extraordinary technical capability of what people can create nowadays to mislead people like us, that we're really thirsty for information. So, they throw a photo or a video or something out there in hopes that people would profile it. And we've seen quite a few over the years go viral that were sometimes marketing ploys, that were sometimes CGI. The Haiti video is something I always go back to. I remember I was producing for History when that kind of went viral. I don't know if you guys know which one I'm talking about, but it had like over 10 million views or some god-awful number. It was one of the most popular UFO videos ever to appear on the internet at that time, and it was all CG. But 10 million plus views, you look at that.
Are you talking about the one that was like multiple ships flying over like a beach setting?
Goes over, yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
That was all.
I do remember when that came out. People were like, "What is this?"
Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing. I mean, people. I can't really fault people. I mean, if they don't care about the topic, but they want to see their work in lights, that's their motivation. And so the lack of vetting by the investigator side contributes to that, where you have to look at the information and truly vet it before you just blast it out there and want to be the first one to break the story, or to have the video or to have the photo. And that's why some of the most popular UFO YouTube channels, all present company excluded, fitting into this category, by the way. But
I've fallen for some. I've fallen for some stuff.
Well, that's what I mean, and they have the most, a couple million followers on one of them that kind of disappeared for a while, and I'll let you guys take the lead if you want to name it. But I don't like giving them credit just because they know that they are putting out hoaxes out there and CG. But it translates to thousands and thousands of dollars a month. And so that's problematic. There is no vetting to some of those channels. They blast it out there, and then there's just nothing but muddy water in the end. And it's very, very hard to make sense of a lot of stuff.
Well, there's funny because there's a video out there right now floating around, and maybe you could find it. Rather, we can play it later in the show. No, it's apparently taken from an airplane. It's being shared by the 12th phase of Jupiter account, and it's yeah.
Is that really what it?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay.
I'm just not saying it.
Okay. I was about to correct you like an idiot. So, okay, gotcha.
No, I'm just making fun of it.
Brain.
But I mean, the video is cool. But when I watched it, I was like, how do we know that's not CGI? How do we know those are the actual pilots talking? How do we know we're even on a? I mean, obviously we have to be on a plane, right, to be at that angle. But there's just so many, like, you don't see anything but a beautiful, it's like, look, if it's real, it's amazing. And then if it's fake, it's like, if it's too good, it's gotta be fake kind of thing. It almost falls into that category, but there's just a lot of other questions that haven't been answered. Like, what flight was it? Where were they going? Who was flying the plane? I mean, it's not the same as the one of the two pilots who actually took footage of the radar systems and then went back out to the light in the sky. And they're talking about it, and they're talking about the radar that they're catching it on, and that it's appearing on. They're checking with the tower. Like, none of that happens in this video.
Yeah.
So to label it as, oh, this is one of the greatest things to come out of UFO footage since the Haitian footage, like it's like, come on, man, like we've got to really critically think about these things before we start. You're right, just passing stuff like that around, because I think there's another one of a Russian film of a UFO turning into a USO and splashing right in front of the boat. And for years, I even thought that was real. Like, it was getting chased by F-16 pilots. Turns out it's a terrible Russian film.
Yeah, there was a video that was real popular of a cube-shaped UFO over Texas, and it was like, this would have been a mass crazy sighting. I didn't get a single report, here in Texas. So I always, especially the Texas CGI hoaxes, were really see through. To me, it's like, well, where's everybody talking about?
I always get a kick out of the fact that there's like those select few YouTube channels, again, with either a couple 100,000 or like a couple million, depending upon the channel, subscribers, where there's actual legitimate UFO researchers, investigators out there. And imagine if you're that lucky one that really captures something incredible, and you're like, yeah, I got to go to the 12th phase of Jupiter or whatever, right, to submit this. That's not like, you don't find places to submit like that. And it's like, they're not only getting one or two, but enough content to fill like on a daily basis. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's for years, has always bugged me. It's like, why give them views? Like, how do they continue to get it? But
there's also a ton, I don't know if they're there anymore, but there's a ton of UFO YouTube channels that will have one or two videos, like no description in the about. Yeah. It almost looked like it's robotic generated. And this is kind of bringing back to has the government already been potentially, using all of us? But
you actually bring up a very interesting aspect to this, and I see it a little less on Twitter, but more so very much on Facebook, and that is these I don't want to say anonymous. They have names and like one or two pictures, but they'll go into, like, I have a Facebook group. It's like 7,000 or 8,000 people or whatever, and people go and communicate. But they go and all they do is post videos. And that a human actually isn't doing that. And so it does bring up a very excellent point.
Quantity.
Are there these, bots going out to disseminate en masse these types of videos, to get them viral, to get people talking, and to essentially muddy the waters? And, I go back to that counterintelligence effort, that the power of the internet is amazing, but the power of the internet to do bad is also pretty frightening. And so for them to create that type of an effort where you just keep flooding these videos out there, that's absolutely on the table for me, because there's too many. I see them every day. I had to initiate like asking a question in the beginning, just one question, just like, Like, tell me why you want to join this group and make it relatable to this group. And I can't tell you how many come in and they say yes, or yes, I totally agreed to your rules. It's like, I never said anything about rules, but the point is that they're automated responses, because most of the questions that you ask people when you join a group, I don't know if you guys run Facebook groups as well, but when you run the group, you can ask those entry questions, and most of them say, will you abide by all the rules and not spam and this and that? So the default answer of yes, I will abide by all your rules usually flies.
Caught them.
So yeah, pardon the pun, but yeah, it usually flies. And so you get accepted into the group, and then there you go. You just start pounding those videos until the bot gets banned. And, at the same time, they've already joined 1,000 other groups. So it's really fascinating. I mean, it's just in some respect, spammers, and, they're just annoying. But in another respect, I think that there's a tool there for again, that counterintelligence effort to just disseminate those types of videos and get them out there and kind of flood the market, if you will, because it gets people talking about them, and it kind of gets the word out about them. And if you want to put out hoaxes, that's a prime way to do it.
This is a question that we've been getting a lot. And I think it's partly because we do focus on the government aspect of this phenomena and how the government's going to play a role in this. So I'm curious to get your opinion on this. Why are we still relying on the United States government for answers? I'll say we are and we aren't. We do have private entities like the Galileo Project, the SCU, that are looking at this without the permission of the government. The sky's not classified. And as these things get cheaper, I think those things will definitely start to happen on a larger scale. But in my opinion, and just going back to the worst case, best case scenario thing, for me, best case scenario is that our lawmakers get 2 to 3 years of classified briefings, and they get to a boiling point where they're like, okay, this is enough. Like, we can't hide this from the American people, the American taxpayer, the world. They deserve to know this. And I think if you get 3 or 4 years of reports like this, you're going to get a candidate to emerge from there saying, hey, I want to be transparent about this, and I'm going to be the first U.S. president to genuinely give you the answers on this if I have to do it even with an executive action, which could be done. But there is this, I think I agree with you, John. There is an aspect of it that will never be accessed ever. And for me, that's okay. I don't need that information. I just want to get the ball rolling on a global scale that this phenomena is worthy of tackling from a scientific perspective. And for me, the U.S. government and governments of the world are going to have a say in this, period. End of story. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't think so. Unless they make it to where it's 100% unavoidable by everybody. And when I say that, of course, the egocentric White House lawn scenario, where the government just doesn't have a choice. This is the reality now.
Yeah.
But I do believe that the government's going to have a big role in this, because people are going to look towards the government for answers when things start really cooking. And I think we'll get there. We're still a few years, but I think we're going to get there. But what do you think about this idea of relying on government for answers?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, because a lot of times, my biggest haters out there, they'll say, oh, John thinks he's going to get answers from FOIA and the government's never going to tell him anything and this and that. It's interesting because those haters are in the same breath are saying that they're, going to get answers because some piece of legislation passes. And to me, that's a false argument. I think the FOIA is a very powerful tool, and I think we have gotten some of the best confirmed UFO evidence through FOIA, period. I truly believe that. I believe that FOIA needs help in many ways, but it's a very powerful tool. The government willingly giving answers, I don't think happens not only with UFOs, but a lot of issues. Right. And you need tools like FOIA to access it. And it is kind of a conundrum that the government has been lying for decades upon decades. So why do we care if they give us information tomorrow? because who's to say, you know, and I'll go back to what I was saying about counterintelligence, that they're not trying to mislead us, that they are not saying something is unidentified when they know darn well it is, or they're not saying something is identified when they darn know well they have no clue what that thing is. There are so many possibilities there that are very hard to get around. And I think that trusting the government is not always, I want to say it's the right move, but it's not always the smartest move, just simply because they have a track record of misleading on this very topic. So where does that leave us? You know, do we ask the government to give the private sector the data? Well, the data is coming from the government, so how can we trust that? You know, I hope that the effort, because Avi Loeb, who I interviewed, I know you guys interviewed a couple times, but when I talked to him on my channel and his project, the Galileo project, was just underway, you could see the passion in him, and you can see how he wanted to stay away from the government. And he really spoke out about how he did not want anything to do with the government essentially classifying things, that he wanted this open. When you start tangling that with, even if it's congressional mandates and Senate legislation, whatever, and you start tangling with that, the government's going to get involved. And at what point will, again, national security triumph that, let's say, one of Avi Loeb's instruments captured something sensitive, whatever sensitivity it might stem from, but sensitive nonetheless, the government is there. And will they have first dibs to say, hey, you need to kick back on that, you didn't see it? And at what point then would and this isn't against Avi, but there is that concern that you would need to potentially abide by it. And that's a concern. I was let down to see that, to be honest with you, that entanglement between a private effort and then the government coming in and saying, hey, let's mandate that we share information with you and you guys can have data. On the surface, that looks and sounds awesome. Below the surface, there may be something else. And I would hate to see a effort like I heard when I spoke to Avi tainted by that. And that effort muddied, just simply because there is a way to entangle the government in that, and the government's going to take the opportunity. I know that comes off as conspiratorial, but look, we've been misled for decades. Do you think all of a sudden, with the signing of a pen, that they are going to start openly sharing data with an amazing scientist like Avi? And in my opinion, no. So it worries me if that gets there. What data will they really be sharing? And yeah, I would absolutely question it.
Yeah, I find it interesting that, Galileo Project and Avi Loeb were mentioned in the Gillibrand bill, but I think Avi has said that he was not notified, or, he had no part of that, and he was surprised to find himself in that bill. So, I'm hoping that Avi Loeb would say, no, I don't want that government data if it does come to him.
You know what? I wasn't aware of that interview, that he wasn't aware. I assumed that there was some correspondence for him to be listed.
I kind of remember him. I remember listening. Is it that the most recent Avi Loeb interview? I'd presume that you guys did. We should go back and find that seconds, because I can't remember if he actually said he wasn't briefed or if he kind of just glossed over it a little bit.
My memory is that he read it in the news and was like, "Oh, cool," kind of thing.
Yeah, it didn't.
That's
seem
interesting.
Like
I wasn't aware. I mean, that's kind of encouraging, but I think Luis, you said it. That I would, or I'm sorry, if Rather said it, but for him to come out and kind of just say, "Hey, look, it's great that I was mentioned, but don't touch me. I want to keep this scientifically based."
Well, I wonder if he had talked about it with people, weeks leading up to it, and then yes, there's a news story of an amendment. Oh, that's my guess. I don't know how you could confidently craft an amendment like that unless you had at least consulted or given a heads up to the different members that you're appointing.
I would think so.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just kind of
that'd be impossible, right?
Yeah, I just wrongfully assumed that they were consulted with to be named, but I'm not sure. I mean, look, if that passes and they share data, I'm all for it. I just fear that the data is tainted. The data should be I'm not a scientist, but in my opinion, from a scientific standpoint, it's all or none. Because if you cherry pick the data, it's tainted and not true. And I would think that maybe Avi would agree with that if you only get 50% of the data, sure, any data is good, but can you conclude off of that? And that's where I question whether or not and I'm kind of using that as a broad term, that the private sector would get all the data. So is some of the data worthwhile if other pieces of that data is withheld? I'm not sure. I think I could argue either way. Of course, any data would be great, but can you scientifically conclude something from a partial data set? And I'm not sure what the answer would be.
Well, yeah, I think the answer is no.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think the answer is no. But I also think that if Avi took a picture of a top secret military plane that had United States Air Force on the side of it, he would just throw that data set out. It wouldn't interest him because that's not what he's looking for. I mean, from what I gathered is that, because when we asked him about the Lou Elizondo sort of Christopher Mellon aspect to this, he's like, they're not scientists. They're not doing science. We're doing the science. They have no say in how that science is conducted. From what I gathered, it was more of a, you might want to look here. You may want to use this instrument. But what are you going to say, rather?
Well, there's two kind of parts to this, right? There's the one part of the Gillibrand Amendment, which is saying we want to share data with Avi Loeb and the Galileo Project, which I think, I have the same concerns that you have, John. But then there's the other aspect, which is the Galileo Project has Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo as kind of like consultants, as research advisors. And we talked with Avi about that latter part. Well, we talked about both. The first part he wasn't aware of, but the latter part, he was saying what we were saying is that they're going to help us advise and stuff, and not actually be involved in the analysis and collection of the data. So I don't have much concerns about the latter after having Avi Loeb kind of explain that.
Well, I think also if let's say you're gonna announce a scientific partnership, I don't know where else would you go first other than the Galileo Project.
I don't know how else you could do it.
What other major university? I suppose you can maybe go to SETI, but SETI's not looking at that part of the atmosphere. They're looking way beyond the low orbit atmosphere. So, I mean,
what a prime wish list would be? Open source it. No distribution list, just open source. And let anybody who wants it have it. And that's it. And end of story. And I have been amazed for years. This isn't anything new. For years, the power of the internet and the minds that come together. Reddit has some really nasty people on it, but they have some really smart, amazingly smart people. Twitter, same deal. Lots of people there that come together and can solve stuff like that, and they come together. It's a powerful tool. And I think that in an absolute perfect legislative mandate is that the government, because if it's not sensitive, right? If Avi Loeb doesn't have a security clearance and they can share it with Avi, share it with the world. I mean, if this is a true scientific endeavor and there's no top secret technology involved or no secrets being spilled, and it is true that they want to be transparent with the data, you open source it, you plop it on a server, anybody can access it. If they don't want to access it, then they don't. But if you open source it, that is a perfect world. And I think that in a true scientific effort, that's how it should be done.
Well, I think he did mention that they were going to open source the data as they start collecting it. But I mean, we're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah.
What do you got, rather?
Yeah, the question is, can he do it? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that he said that he'd open source the data kind of after they do the analysis. They're not going to do a live stream, progressive update as they collect data.
Right, which is understandable. No?
If that question was to me, yes. Okay. I guess.
I prefer to have the data right away, but
how long is that period of time, right? Where they're
bingo. How long? And then. And again, this isn't a knock against him. Please don't take it that way.
No.
I've said it 1,000 times. I'm an advocate for transparency. So if the data is solid, then put it out there. Galileo Project captured that data, and then I think that could be shared. But I think that it becomes territorial in scientific endeavors, and I can't fault them for that. If they make a super huge discovery that's going to change mankind, then sure, I can understand why they want to release it first. But I struggle with it. I mean, you can't advocate for transparency and scream transparency and ask for it while you're withholding the data. And so that's where I kind of struggle. I mean, even goes to the Stars Academy. You got an organization that's been around for years, and they're a prime example, preaching, demanding transparency. What happened? We don't have the data. And, I got more from the U.S. government on the testing of the UAP, and I'll put it in quotes, the UAP debris that they have. I got more from the U.S. government than I did from TTSA. So the intentions in the beginning of efforts are not always panning out the way that we want them to. And that's a prime example. Not saying that Galileo is going to end up like that or anything. I'm just, again, that advocate for transparency. If you got the data, put it out there. If it's a true scientific effort, if you're trying to profit or anything like that, sure, I totally understand.
I think it just depends on what kind of operation you're running. I think if you've got a grant for $100 million and you can form a team that could take that data and immediately open source it in a responsible way that makes sense for everybody, awesome. But it doesn't sound like they have anywhere near $100 million. Last I checked, I think it was in the $4 to $5 million range, which I don't think will be able to. They won't be able to harness a team of that magnitude. So to collect the data, say for a year or two off of that money, come together, write a paper. Take
like
that
12
data,
phase of the moon's making that, right?
Right. 12 phases of Jupiter.
Oh, Jupiter!
God.
Shoot, I
You
meant
messed
to say
it up,
Jupiter.
Jay. You messed it up. You messed up the fake name of the
beer bream.
Anyway. Well, I would love if this bill does pass. The thing that I think I would focus on as an office, if it's created, is just the data that's already out there. Like, why can't you give the American people the longer versions of the Tic Tac, Go Fast, and Gimbal? That it seems
because the minute that they admit that exists, the minute that they admit that exists, that they've just exposed that they've lied to the American people for a couple of years. Now, that doesn't come as a shock to us, but what I'm trying to say is that's probably why they wouldn't do something like that.
But don't you think the news would out-Trump the lie? Like, I don't think anybody's going to care that the government was lying about these 3 UFO. We already know they're real, right? The Navy confirmed them as real Navy videos. And if this is the evidence that parts of the government is propping up as being nobody's ever called it a smoking gun, but the stories that accompany these videos and the pilots that accompany these videos, all of that stuff is public. So I think if you have just an investigation on those 3 videos with a releasing of the full videos and when these things came around, it's over U.S. soil. It's in a training ground. It's not even in foreign airspace. We've already seen the systems that they're running on. We know the radar that was being used. We know what fleet. We know everything. So what's the secret? And for me, if I got the full versions of those videos, I could promise you the last problem I would have would be, oh, they lied to us. You know what I mean?
I do. But I don't think that would be the majority. And again, this is when they get themselves in a corner, they generally will maintain the line. Here's one more. And I don't know if you guys want me to do this. Let me pull up. This was one of the stories. I don't know if you want to share that. Yeah. That's one of the articles that I wrote, but it kind of plays into what we're talking about.
Right.
On how, according to the standpoint of the U.S. Navy, because you were talking about it being public, that every case that they sent over to the UAP task force, they considered classified. And I had this case open for quite some time. And you can see here, the Office of N2N6 informed DNS 36 that the responsive records, which again were all reports, cases submitted to the Undersecretary of Defense. I know that it was ODNI, or I'm sorry, the Naval Intelligence, but at the time, USDI was rumored to be the ones that was leading it, but they knew what I meant. They sent it over to the Navy. So that's why, in case anybody who's really paying attention to details, that's why it said USDI, but it was Naval Intelligence that was heading it. That's what I was requesting, all the reports that they received. And it said that they exempted it in their entirety under 5 USC section 552B1, which is national security information, 100% of what they got. So why? So that's not public. Those are not, pilot photos and stuff like that on their personal cell phone cameras. Whatever they were looking at was sensitive enough for them to blanket deny the entire case and say, we're not going to give this to you. I do have this under appeal now. I wrote this, let me see here, beginning of November. So that's one example that we would think that information, or at least part of it, would be public or something that they could share. According to them, 100% not true, that they won't share anything. So it's kind of a letdown, but same respect, it really does show the sensitivity behind what they're doing and what the phenomena is to them. And that is a national security risk.
Well, then I want to ask this last question of you before we move on to some other things to talk about. The first, I guess it's the reaction to the AOI MSG office.
Yeah.
Rather had some red flags go off for him as the best thing I could call it, right? Rather, or am I speaking for you when I say
Well,
that?
yeah, I was just very surprised at the backlash by it. And, there's been some public people like Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo essentially saying that there's elements within the DOD that are hoodwinking the undersecretary and are trying to deceive Congress, which seem like explosive claims. And I haven't personally seen any actual evidence of that.
I'm with you, rather. Yeah.
Curious what you think, John.
I'm with you as well. And I was a little surprised at the reaction, to be honest with you, because in June, I wanted to pull up, make sure that I had it right, but the memorandum that was submitted that Friday night in June, on June 25th, by Kathleen Hicks, saying that essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, but that they were going to establish a more concerted effort and this and that. I remember a lot of praise, by myself included. That was a surprise. That would, to me, was, I wouldn't say more important, but it was like kind of more important than the UAP report itself, because that had solidified that the DOD was moving forward with creating a more concerted effort to research UAPs. And so that's something that I think was very much praised in June. Now, fast forward to now, and that the Gillibrand amendments being talked about, it's not even passed yet, and we're hoping for that to pass, and it likely will pass, or at least some version of it, and this huge push for transparency in public reports. That's all great, but the AOI MSG is done. It's solidified. It's right. Concrete. It's there, and they're doing it. And was the timing to, circumvent the Gillibrand amendment? Okay, I know some people think that. To be honest with you, I don't see it that way. Maybe a little bit, but this effort was underway from this June memo that they released that, again, was highly praised. Now they're doing it, and I think it was highly praised at first, and then people like Luis Elizondo and Mellon come out and they're saying, oh, no, this is bad, bad, bad. And then like 3/4 of UFO Twitter was like, yeah, this is bad. Don't do it. No, it's actually good because it's there, and it creates a paper trail for people like me, because I can't bank on potential transparency tomorrow. I can only bank on what I can access today, right? That's how I am as a researcher. Some people will hate me for saying that, but the AOI MSG is there, and it is something that I can go after right now. Anything created by the Gillibrand amendment, I can eventually, but I can't do anything with it now because it hasn't passed. It's not there. From an investigative standpoint, it's not real yet. And until it's real, I can't get super excited about it, because who knows what's ultimately going to pass and whatever. The AOI MSG, I think, is getting undue criticism, simply because the UAP task force, look what that did. There was a congressional mandate for a report. We got it. It wasn't perfect, but it was something that came to fruition. And that with the AOI MSG, that puts in stone an office that I can continue to hit, hopefully, for years to come on the data that they get, the information that they get, the photos that they get, the videos that they get, the communications that they have, the scope changes of their project. I can keep boring you to death and listing things I can go after for years in itself, but that's what the AOI MSG is. If people don't think that people like me can get things through FOIA, then why are you banking on a Gillibrand amendment giving you anything? Because if you really have that much distrust in the government, then why does it matter that the legislative branch is getting involved? You can argue the legislative branch has lied to you more over the years than the Pentagon, simply because they're all politicians and you never know what to believe. So that's the challenge in all of this. Who do you believe? For me, it's not about who I believe, it's what I can use. And that AOI MSG being solidified at this point is something that I can use and information that I can go after.
Yeah, I think I was like, oh, Lou and Christopher Mellon think this is bad. They're saying it's undermining, the Gillibrand amendment. They must be coming from a perspective that I'm not understanding.
I don't.
And so it was curious, sort of the rally cry once I got to step back and
Jeremy
and Jane
Corbell
sort
too.
of, yeah,
part of that. Yeah.
I mean, it seemed like a lot of folks were, and I think it's partly because would not shock me if the Gillibrand amendment was written word for word by Christopher Mellon and with some say by Lou Elizondo, because those blog posts matched that legislative proposal almost word for word in some cases. So they feel that this office that they came from, this part of the government that they used to work in, is not going to be as transparent. There's no public oversight. There's no way for us to get real answers other than through FOIA. And we've seen through FOIA that sometimes they could still obfuscate the information. But as we sit back and we're kind of now, 2 weeks after this amendment has been proposed, what's more offices, more data, data, right? That's what we're looking for.
Right. No, you nailed it. What's stopping Gillibrand from adding in a line or two saying, oh, look, another resource that we can mandate to do reports. Right. So the DOD Pentagon press secretary, John Kirby, said the other day, we don't have plans for a report or, reports, or I can't promise you this. Look, those are spokespeople lines. Who cares about that? If Gillibrand and Congress, the Senate, whatever, they want to then utilize that office, this is why I see the benefit. That office is again, it's there and it's ongoing. They don't need to create a new effort, although they still can. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying now they can focus in language right onto that office and say, you guys, I don't care what your intentions are on reports, but my congressional mandate, my bill, my whatever, says that you will every 6 months, and you will give us our briefing every 3 months or whatever the language is. Nothing is stopping that because that entity now exists. And that, I would think, is a good thing because the Gillibrand amendment as written with a lot of the big points can still continue. But now we have the DOD saying, oh, look, we've got this office and we're researching it. Senate can go, great, you can brief us too. That's like you said, the more data, the better. And somebody in your chat room I saw in the corner of my eye says, how can John say this? Because they're essentially wanting the secrecy. Well, no, because if there's a congressional mandate, if there's a bill, if there's a whatever, add the language in to make sure that doesn't happen. So if you really want
even if it doesn't get included in this year's bill, that's something you could add in next year's NDAA.
well, I mean,
Worst
aren't
case.
things still being bantered about? It wasn't
There's
the
still
other
being
day.
bantered about. I'm just wondering if at this point, if they're adding things to it, I think they're more trying to subtract things from it.
Right.
So I could understand a situation where this office is created, it wasn't worked into the wording of this year's bill, and we don't want to bring any more to me, like, it doesn't, according to Jazz, like, nobody's talking about this UAP bill. Like, nobody's bringing up any, like, I can't believe we're spending money on this. Nobody. It's a bipartisan bill. They're talking about other things, other hiccups in this bill before it passes. So if it passes with amendments, I have a feeling we're going to get the bill as written, and to add things to it now, I think would bring unwanted attention to the bill. Like, oh, you guys are focused on others. Just stay focused on that. All we want is you to pass the bill with the amendments. So I can kind of see that going in that direction as well.
Yeah, there's going back to what you were saying about adding language later. Yes, I mean, if we mandated something tomorrow for an office that just got underway, you're going to be 6 months to a year before they really get a substantial amount of data and information to share anyway. So the mandate, if it came tomorrow morning and the president signed it and said, okay, AOI MSG, you got to give us a report. Well, there's nothing there right now, or at least, again, with the effort moving forward. They can go backwards, but we already have that. We already have 144 cases in a UAP report. 143, according to them, are a mystery. So now moving forward, the AOI MSG can essentially collect that data. And in a future bill, they revisit it, put another amendment in there and say, okay, that AOI MSG back in, November/December of 2021, well, you guys are 6 months to a year in now, so you probably have data to share. So we want to have a briefing and we expect a report within 180 days, and there we go again. So that transparency, like let's say the Gillibrand amendment gets drastically changed, that it's not because of the AOI MSG. I don't believe it. I think that if they really want the transparency, they'll find a way to get it, not only from the DOD and the new office, but every other entity that they want to hit or put an agency in charge of it to create those reports and essentially accumulate the data, very similar to what we saw in June. The sharing of the information is what I believe, we're going to potentially have an issue with. And that's, again, a kind of a different topic. But regardless, that's how I think that this may play out. And I don't think people should be discouraged. I was very surprised at the pushback in the sense that this is another, it may be more secretive than the other efforts if they are underway, but it's an effort nonetheless. And it's one that can be congressionally mandated to report and be more transparent regardless of the DOD's desires.
Yeah. Well, I think we definitely hit on that as far as even like you said, if all of this is signed into law tomorrow, which it wouldn't be, it would be January 1st is when it would take effect. The office would still need 180 days to be created. And then you would need to give that office at least 6 months, another 6 months to start figuring out how the office is going to work, because it's a brand new entity. It's not the ATIP program that's being morphed into this, and now we're this new sort of office with actual funding and actual power. It's going to be a year at least before I think we get to see any reports. But I just get excited because there's a couple of things happening. First of all, the political aspect of this conversation is changing. We're having congressmen talk about it on the floor. They're advocating for more transparency. They're advocating for public hearings. There are co-sponsored amendments being put that would be, from a verbiage standpoint, unprecedented. I think you get this office existing for 2 to 3 years with, say, a $500 million budget. Some say, Jazz has said, up to maybe $2 billion. This office that would be spread out over an amount of years, but it's a permanent office. I think 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road of senators getting private briefings with filtered public briefings or reports, I think it's going to reach a boiling point. It's going to reach a point where they can't they were not going to be able to contain this conversation from the American people for much longer, because now sort of, I mean, the cat's out of the proverbial bag, like this is something that the American people have paid to know. And there's also a political grassroots movement growing. Like if you go back and you look at Senator Tim Burchett's tweets, you look at Senator Gillibrand's tweets, when it comes to this topic, it's by far and away their most popular, most retweeted, most liked. There is a political popularity for them to talk about this. And I think this amendment and the fact that people are calling, they are engaging there. I mean, here's the thing. They might have, Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo, maybe, let's just say for a second, they riled everybody up. I still think it's a good riling up. Like the fact that people got motivated to pick up their phone, call their senator, call their congressman, write an email, send out a tweet, retweet, say thank you, tell them the importance of the Gillibrand Amendment, why you feel it needs to pass. That may not, it only seems like a few thousand people now, but I think in 3 to 4 years, that could easily be a few million people asking for those things. And now you're talking about a legitimate political, I don't know, and this is another conversation. Would you be a one issue voter for, say, a president of the United States on a topic like this? Like if the president you're about to vote for is pro disclosure, but say has extremist values, would you vote for that president versus let's say a progressive president that's not offering you disclosure, but is offering you, I don't know, progressive things like health care, child care, better wage, higher minimum wage, things like that, an infrastructure, there's a bunch of things. I don't want to get political, but I'm just curious, like, how would you vote? Would you be a one voter issue? Or one issue voter, rather? Like, okay, that guy's talking about UAP. That's the guy I'm voting for. I think I'd have to see the political platforms. I don't think I'd be a one issue voter, depending on what the issues are that they're advocating for. But I do believe that there are a lot of people that, when it comes to this topic, if you're going to be the candidate that's going to give me disclosure, that's going to fight for it, that's going to release information, I'm voting for you, and I don't care what the rest of your platform says. Like, I want this. So I'm curious. I mean, am I crazy? Is that a crazy thing to say?
Is that to me?
Yeah, I'm talking to anybody. Like, I mean, I know there was a lot in there, but I mean, I see it as a legitimate political, not party, but a segment of voters that you're going to have to placate to if you want to get votes in upcoming elections.
So here's my reaction. You're not crazy. Well, maybe a little, but maybe a little. And I apologize for my elderly dog. She's blind and deaf, so she uses sonar behind me to try and find her way through the house. So I apologize. No worries. My reaction to that would be I wouldn't do that, and here's why. Presidential administrations have had a history, a proven one, of presidents that have gone in with the intent to disclose, in the real definition of the word disclose, but reveal UFO information. You have Gerald Ford with the 1960s when he was in the House. He knew that there was a huge issue with UFOs. He was a big advocate for hearings and to have this push for UFO information to be out to the general public. That led to the Condon Committee. Gerald Ford later obviously was president and nothing happened. Jimmy Carter saw a UFO. He went into office with the full intent to really kind of say the reality of what UFOs were because he was a witness. That didn't happen. Ronald Reagan also had one, a UFO sighting that when he went into office had intentions to reveal what was there, and he did not. President, what's that?
President Truman too.
I mean, you can go
about UFOs.
You can go
a big one
all the way back. Yeah, I produced a show for History Channel called UFOs in the White House, And we went all the way back to, I believe it was Roosevelt, and all the way forward. At the time was George W. George W. Bush was in office. So it was quite a few years ago when I created that. But we explored all of the presidents and their connections to UFOs. And we were able to connect every president from Roosevelt on through George W. at the time to UFOs somehow. And yet nothing was revealed, despite good intentions, despite people being witnesses like Carter and so on. Yet nothing happened. So the intention for transparency, again, national security trumps it. And sadly, we have a history of that.
Yeah, and I say just look at the earlier example you gave with JFK and Trump, right?
Correct,
it's
yeah.
hard to get things done.
I would be personally nervous about any president talking about disclosure. So I think I would be worried about being lied to about it.
See,
that's why this UCR is so. I think that's why this is so important. And I think talking to Congress people directly and talking about open source data, I think that's so important, because whenever there is a president that wants to be the disclosure president, because I think somebody wants to be, we will know the facts, right? And we'll be able to, peer through the muddy water a little bit better, right?
We would hope.
That's the hope, right? Yes.
Yeah.
I feel hopeful, on shows where we're talking openly about it here. I think as long as folks in the live chat are staying on top of it and we're staying on top of it, I feel really optimistic about having 2 offices and lots of data.
To give you guys a shout out, and I truly believe this, efforts like the Big Phone Home should and have to continue. And the reason is it keeps the conversation going. Your last event, I know you had at least one politician come on and join you and talk about the issue. You look at how they're not afraid to talk about it on the House floor, that they want answers, and we see that continuing. We may not get the ultimate 100% undeniable truth that we want, but it's those efforts that are going to keep the conversation going. And sticking with the facts, sticking with the real part of why this is important, and getting that conversation continuing. That's the important part of this, because, again, even though the Gillibrand Amendment may not be 100% as it's written right now, or maybe it will be, I'm not really sure. Regardless, it's that conversation that has to continue for the politicians to go, okay, we can't let this go, because the people are, they're calling us, and that crazy Luis guy is doing these events where, thousands of people now are faxing and calling. That's where they can't ignore it. They then take that to the floor, and you get results like a Gillibrand Amendment or a UAP report or whatever. So that is something that I definitely want to bring up, because even though we may not get everything, we will get something if we keep the conversation going. If the conversation ends, then so does the issue. And then you will just get the standard boilerplate responses, because not a whole lot of people are interested anymore. Keep it going, you get a lot more results.
Yeah, Tommy Zito is a perfect example. It took him 2 years to get a sit-down conversation with his congressman, but he got one.
Yeah,
and he actually made his congressman aware of a lot of things that he wasn't aware of. And I mean, some people call me but naive. Some people call me very hopeful. I just believe our government still works. I truly believe it. I believe that our 3 branches of government, the Senate, the House, the President of the United States, all of these things function. They may not be functioning as well as people want. It's slow. It's annoying at times. It's disengaging most of the times. And for me, this is a great way to show folks how to engage with their government officials, not only on the UAP topic, but on whatever topic they want. Whatever is important to you, you can use the phone home blueprint and apply it to whatever kind of activism you want to engage yourself with. But for me, pointing at each other's not doing anything. Pointing up and trying to get more information, I think, is a better use of our time. And maybe I am naive. I could be. But I think this stuff is eventually going to really hold some water. And I think it's going to be a legitimate political topic within the next 10 years. I really, really do. I mean, I see the political winds changing right in front of my face. And for me, it's exciting. And it just depends on where your expectations are, is how this information is going to hit you. If you think you're going to get the bodies and the planet system and the race and the, and the craft, I think you're going to be really, really disappointed. But if you're looking for more pilot testimony, if you're looking for longer videos of stuff that we've already seen, if you're looking for historical data that should be unclassified and shared with the American people, I think the only way the American people have any leverage in getting it is if we ask for it, and we ask for it in a nice manner. you know, so check out the templates that were helped written by John Greenewald, also by Ratherby Squinting, and a whole bunch of other folks. We just had one by Graham Rendell, that help in these arenas. So, on that note, Andrew Hillier says we should run for president.
I sent out some
Jimenez 2024.
I send out some emails. It's not my nature to do. I just can't send something I didn't write, but it was inspiring me, and it got me. And it was fun. It was
actually
fun to write the letter and try to
more
maybe
fun
blow
is when you get a
somebody's mind,
response.
right?
No,
it's kind of cool just learning about the government.
It's cool to learn about the government, and it's cool to get a response on these things, which a lot of people have been getting responses. Sometimes boilerplate, sometimes very, very interested. So I that's just the way I'm coming from it, and I'm not saying it's right, but it's the only thing I know that I can do. So that's what I'm going to try and push for. John Music with a $10 donation. Thank you so much, Luis. It was cool to see you in the live chat while I was video chatting in the panel discussion with Alien Girl 111. I've done it these past 4 weeks in a row. Video chatting is far superior to live chat. Thanks for the tip. Yes, I did enjoy you in the Alien Girl 111 discussion the other night. It was cool to see all of you guys in there. She always has a party on her show. Okay, so real quick, because I know you did mention it, I think on Twitter, John. We'll just go right to it. The cube on the moon. What are we looking at, Greenewald? I mean, I already saw Mick West say, yeah, that's a rock about 268 yards away. There's a lot of big rocks on the moon, but it seems to have caught the attention of the Chinese government. So what can you fill us in on this?
Well, to be honest with you, not much. I was intrigued by it simply because of the amount of exposure it got. Space.com was the article that I had forwarded out. But the fact that people are talking about, that versus an alien blog saying, oh, look at this, alien cube on the moon, that it was actually a reputable scientific outlet like space.com saying this is what they captured. Right. I never know what to think. There's everywhere from Bigfoot to a Nazi helmet to things that are seen on Mars and the moon and all that stuff. And, it's like seeing a dragon in clouds. It's the same effect. Sometimes, though, there are very interesting things that you can see. And I would say that this was intriguing. I mean, you don't normally have a cube or something like that with straight edges on the moon. So, and the fact that it's on, the far side, I think it adds to the intrigue. But I mean, honestly, what you see in that article is all I would know. I've got no secret information on it. It literally popped up in my feed this morning, and I thought it was, pretty interesting that they're talking about it and exploring more things like that.
Well, rather, was it you that was saying something about camera systems that we really should be able to? I mean, people have gotten some pretty damn good pictures of the moon. We should be able to see structures like this if they were actually there. No,
well, I don't think that's true. Actually, I've looked into this as well. Avi Loeb is a big proponent of exoarchaeology. Looking at the moon and other places to see if over the 13 billions of years of our solar system, maybe someone came and put something on the moon there. And currently we have some pretty good maps of the moon, but they're not that great. Like 10% of the moon's surface we have down to 1 meter resolution, which is, kind of like a not quite all the way zoomed out in Google Maps, but, 1 meter, you can see things that are about 1 meter. But 90% of the moon is only down to 100 meter resolution. So, if there's any spacecraft that's not ours or weird structures on the moon that are, a couple meters long, we'd have we wouldn't be able to see them unless the rover comes up and takes a look.
Have you guys heard what Buzz Aldrin on CNN, I think, a while back, he said there was a weird monolith on Mars's moon. We're waiting to be discovered or found. So that not a little bit farther away, but who could imagine what's on other moons if we don't really know what's on our own.
Yeah. So. I mean, I think that's the first step to, this exoarchaeology is to get really detailed surface maps of all the things in our solar system and take a look.
Eventside says we're all chomping at the bit for data. Meanwhile, tons of lunar reconnaissance orbiter imagery hasn't been combed over for anomalies.
I watch moonwalk videos. I just watch them and I look for things. And I think one time I saw something that maybe could be a UFO. But there's probably so much out there.
It reminds me of I don't know if you all remember the MH370 when the plane disappeared, and there was a big movement of Google image search. People around the world, they kind of had a crowdsourced thing where you could pull up a random place in the ocean and look at it. And there was a lot of interesting things that they found there. And I do wonder if even the 100-meter resolution maps of the moon, if anyone's really looked at every place to identify the weird stuff that might potentially be there.
There's a guy in the face group that I've had, and in fact, he's been a member of my message forum for years and years, and his name is Will Ease, and he does just this. I mean, he just goes through hours upon hours of footage of the live streams and the photos, and I mean, he painstakingly does it and finds some pretty interesting material. I've highlighted on theblackvault.com and showed these anomalies. Some are, who knows, space debris or something like that. But he finds these weird things of objects moving, making turns, and he does an amazing job. So those that take the time to do it, you see some pretty crazy stuff. I'm always intrigued by some of the things that he's found.
Well, we did. I know you haven't had a chance to see the whole interview, John, but we did have a conversation last week with John Ramirez, and rather you caught some smoke on this, man. People were like, Jesus, Rather's being such a jerk.
Oh, shoot, I didn't watch that.
Hard.
I
spit out my coffee all over my monitor.
I loved that you asked for the medal. I loved it. It was...
I think it was pretty split down the middle of the responses. A lot of people were saying, good job for asking those questions. A lot of people maybe were a little bit offended, but
I was.
You're doing it right.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that we need to, this John Ramirez is a CIA officer, and he's making these wild claims, and I think it's important to drill down to where his informed speculation comes from, right? And based on our interview, it seems like his informed speculation doesn't come from the CIA at all. It comes from, Wikipedia and Google searches.
Well, and also going on to UFO conferences.
Yeah.
Well, it was okay. So, yeah, because I asked, there was a poll that I put up before the show, and it says, "How did you feel about the John Ramirez interview last Friday?" And so the options were, he seemed honest and sincere, and I trust him. I don't believe anything he said. He lost me at the hybrid theory. And the last one was, I want to trust everything he said. So we had 244 votes. In last place said, the crowd said, I don't believe anything he says, with 18% of the votes coming in that they don't believe a thing coming out of his mouth. In third place is, I want to trust everything he said, with 19% of the vote. 21% of the vote said he lost me at the hybrid theory. And then 42% of the votes said he seemed honest and sincere. I trust him. I don't know how I would vote on this. I think I want to trust him.
Well,
go ahead.
He doesn't seem dishonest in anything he says. Like, I believe that he's saying his truth, right?
Right.
I had a question, for John, because I think one of the most interesting parts of that interview was he talked about a unclassified CIA meeting where he got invited by a high up CIA person, and there were other people in this meeting, researchers, academics. He could tell by the sign-up list that they had, .edu. And he said that, that he was allowed to take a cell phone camera in. There is no classification at all. And that they told him in this meeting that we are alien hybrids. And he didn't get any explanation, no evidence, but, he took that as fact. And, I guess my question is, I've heard this before with Danny Sheehan saying kind of a similar thing, where he got taken in by these military people and shown, like in Danny Sheehan's case, the Roswell crash and pictures of alien languages in a unclassified
Yeah, I was on
setting.
That panel.
Yeah.
And I question with Danny Sheehan.
Yeah. Do you think that these unclassified meetings where they're giving this explosive material, this explosive information is possible? Could they be doing this? Is this what could possibly be going on here?
Yeah. In regards to the Danny Sheehan thing, if I could start there, I like Danny. I've known Danny a long time. I don't buy that, just simply because that's not how secrecy works. And then the same with like the John Ramirez thing. I mean, maybe that meeting took place, and they said that to him. To me, that's just too far-fetched. I mean, if there's no context or anything like, hey, we're alien hybrids. I mean, what's really tough this day and age is that, and I'll probably get flack for this, but being military or government or former military or former government doesn't make you spew gospel, and I think that that's not a jab against anybody directly, but rather as a whole, we all need to remember this when people come out with stories and this and that. And if it is more speculation, not necessarily on things that he saw or learned from inside the CIA, but outside, that's great. He's like one of us, he wants to learn more information, and he's intrigued by it, and maybe he believes more things than maybe I do, or that Rather does, or Luis does. My whole point is that it just doesn't make it gospel, because and again, I want to speak broadly here, because I've spoken to John. I think he's a very nice guy. I have no problem with him whatsoever. So I'm saying this broadly, that we have to remember it just doesn't mean that everything is gospel, whether it be from a former CIA, former DOD, former Pentagon personnel, former Navy officer. Doesn't matter. We always just have to remember they're human, just like all of us, that they have desires to learn more, that they want to know more. And just because they worked on the inside of the government doesn't necessarily make everything that they say, true to gospel. It just means that, they've had experiences, or they believe certain things. And that's great. That's not a knock against them. It's just, I think some people equate that if somebody's government or former government and they say something that they like to hear, that it's automatically true because they're government or former government. When the same person hears something from a government or former government personnel that they don't like, they automatically don't believe it because they're government, and how dare us ever trust the government, and I think that there's a selective belief system as well that's at play here that I think gets some people in trouble, where they believe what they want to believe simply because that fits into their narrative. But when they hear something they don't like, they automatically take away from it and say, no, government people lie. Thomas Wilson, a prime example, that he's automatically chastised because, well, he's government and he has to lie, but it's just because people don't, want to believe that. So I think that there's that selective belief system. So going back to my point, I think that we have to remember it just doesn't mean it's gospel. We do have to vet. And rather, I give you a lot of credit. You asked great questions. I saw the Twitter posts about it. And I believe that going through parts of the interview that I did listen to, that I stumbled on part of that. But people need to be asked about their credentials. If they're touting their credentials, they should be asked about them, and they should show them. And if they don't show them, then, that's a red flag for me. There's a very small handful of people that have come to me privately that say they work for, inside a government agency or military. And a lot of times I will ask before conversations go farther to prove it, and most of them don't. It's a small handful of people that actually will, and you see it. And it's not a bad question to ask. So my props to you, because I think that there should be more vetting. And again, I'm saying this broadly, not directing it at anybody. but more vetting about people that are getting the exposure that they are, especially with these anonymous sources that people tout. We don't know any vetting on those, and yet they're the biggest pieces of evidence that people have that they like to talk about. So vetting is key, especially this day and age, asking those right questions. And if you tout either CIA or NSA or DIA credentials, then I would be prepared to show them. I won't name the agency because I don't want to pinpoint the guy, but there was one person that's a prominent name that I wanted to interview on my channel. And I asked that particular person to prove credential-wise what they were saying, meaning their credentials, published author and everything. And they wouldn't do it and made up an excuse on the interview and wouldn't come aboard. So I really try and vet people that I put on the channel because I was going to take the credentials that he gave me and give them to the agency that he said that he worked for, simply because it would be public knowledge if he was, ready to share that. And I was going to verify it with the agency, and they wouldn't do it. So my whole point is I think we need to really be careful with who gets into the limelight and who gets on certain shows. And if they're saying big claims and touting certain credentials, they should prove it.
Yeah, no, well, we got him to whip out his medal. So, which was a great moment. And it was, I think it for at least from his work perspective, people could say, okay, he definitely worked in the CIA. We now know that. Of course, that maybe the medal was fake, didn't look fake. It always gets into this weird area, but it was a cool moment. And yeah, I thought rather ask great questions. And I think if we're in a place where half the audience loves the interview and half the audience doesn't like the interview, then we're in the right place. Mm-hmm. We're right down the middle, which is where we want to be when it comes to this topic. Because again, nobody has answers. Nobody has answers on this topic. Rodrigo Vieira had a question for you, and this is something that actually Ramirez called for you to FOIA in the show. Yeah,
and that was one of the sections that I looked at.
And so this question here, have you ever looked into the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency through FOIA? I
have, yeah, and I've filed quite a few different requests. I believe way back in the day that I filed one. I have a different organization of my FOIA request that I started about 10 years ago. So I'm pretty sure that I did the NGA over 10 years ago. I'm not sure. The NRO, I know for a fact. I have that letter online. They said they have no UAPs. But regardless, I filed again. But I had done so quite a few months prior to your interview with John, simply because the NGA was in the UAP report. So I had already hit them anyway in, that huge batch of 50 plus cases that I filed. So yes, the cases are still open. I'm waiting for them to pan out. We'll see what happens. I'm not really sure. Do I have high hopes? Not really, simply because those types of agencies, their equipment is highly sensitive, and years ago I went after, and this is a much older spy satellite called the DSP, or the Defense Support Program, and tried to get captures that I knew were being captured by the DSP satellite of a phenomena of some kind. This actually ties into fast walkers and stuff like that. And everything was classified even on the DSP. So with the NGA, what kind of stuff will I get into technology-wise and what they're capturing? Probably highly sensitive, and they'll probably deny it. But it doesn't hurt to try, so I'm definitely going after it.
You're muted, Lou. But I think you're talking about Daryl.
Yeah, I am talking about Daryl. Thank you, rather. Sorry about that. Does John Greenewald think there will ever be or ever could be a legit federal government Snowden-like whistleblower and subsequent download of UAP info?
I always get myself in trouble saying I don't support efforts like Snowden, and I don't.
Or Gary McKinnon in the past, I guess, would be
with like a hacker or something like that. Yeah, it's always interesting. Snowden said that he looked for UFO information, didn't find anything. I was always intrigued by that because obviously Snowden did have access to highly classified technology and
definitely seems like the kind of nerdy guy who would look up information like
that.
Yeah,
and yet he found nothing. So that's always been intriguing. Will there ever be somebody like that? Possibly. The problem is, will we believe it, or at least will those that are interested in vetting believe it? You look in the last 2 years, how much stuff has leaked out, some of which, panned out. And again, kudos to Jeremy Corbell, because it's so rare when leaked information actually, pans out. So, but away from that, you look at all the stuff that is surfaced on, let's say, Reddit. Even, Richard Dolan had leaked what the classified UAP report was about, and that just kind of vanished. That was from a trusted source, he said, and he had all this, crazy technology, even, essentially confirming the alien existence. What happened to that? If it's such a trusted source, all of that is not vetted. So if somebody truly comes out with information and either leaks it or really even puts their name to it, will we believe it? There's so much crud out there for us to sift through, most of which never really pans out, or if it does, there's very, very little evidence to support it. Again, I think at the end of the day, will we, as the objective part of the UFO community, and I say that because we all know that there are certain percentages that don't necessarily vet the information that they get, will we believe it? And I would say probably not.
Unless, of course, the federal government chases that person outside of the, to live into some crazy place like Russia. Maybe then would you believe it?
Restationed to Kyrgyzstan? Okay,
yeah,
maybe, right?
Okay, well, CH Stacy 33 asks, or I don't think there's a question here, but just says, in the released CIA files, there are a few documents about similar meetings with nuclear engineer. I don't remember the name. They seem to be feeding him info they knew was fake to get him to answer, or to knew was false to get him away.
I think this is regard to the hybrid meeting, the rumored meeting about hybrids. So maybe this was disinformation. That's what that feels like. The Danny Sheehan and this kind of random briefing were hybrids. Like,
in regards to the question, I can't tell you the name off the top of my head, but it kind of rings a bell that there was an engineer that was continuing to write the CIA, and there was quite a few letters. I believe I did a video, a long video. Well, I know I did a video about the CIA UFO stuff. I believe I talked about it in this video, but I did that about 2 years ago. So I'll have to revisit it. But there were quite a few back and forths between the CIA and this engineer, if it's the one that I'm thinking about. And essentially they were trying to make him go away. They were kind of annoyed by him. So that vaguely rings a bell. I just don't recall what his name was.
That's all right. Thank you so much, Cypocalypse, with a $1.49 super sticker. Truly appreciate it. Well, Mr. John Greenewald Jr., I can't appreciate you enough, man, for coming by and getting weird again with us here on the Unidentified Celebrity Review.
Anytime.
Yeah, I mean, you're always an open book. You're always willing to come on and hang out with us and bring some clarity to the topic. And SetX, you do a damn good job at managing expectations, Greenewald.
It's to a fault, though. Not everybody likes that.
Bum the hell out of me, but I always appreciate it, man, because again, like we're not trying to subscribe to belief systems. We want actual proof. It's why Rather's here, it's why Jane's here, it's why Michael's here, because they're all really good weights, at least for me, to bring me down to earth. But man, I just look at this through a different lens. It's very difficult for me to not bring my personal experience to the table when we're looking at this topic. Yeah. I try my best, but man, there are just sometimes where I'm just like, yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. Let's go with that.
Yeah.
And we have to slow down. We have to slow down, and we have to look at the information and make sure the things that people are telling us are held to the fire. In other words, we have to do that, and so we follow your lead, dude. You're a great inspiration for this channel and what we're trying to do, and we can't appreciate you enough. I know you've gotten a lot of flack over the last couple of weeks about this this Gillibrand amendment and how you're not, like you've done everything in your power to help move this conversation along from a
I was standpoint. Really surprised by some of the comments. Then my response to a lot of them, I know you're out of time, but my response to a lot of them is, okay, where did I say this?
Right.
And like every time that I like not fire back, but like respond quickly and say, okay, where are you getting this from? Nobody can like cite where I say things. So they'll say that I'm making certain claims, And I'm like, okay, where did I say this? And they can't do it. And, some of them, to their credit, have apologized. I think the one thread that you're probably referring to, he ended up, admitting that he made it up. He said, oh, you know what, you're actually right. I made that up. And I was like, you're really admitting that right now?
Yeah.
But that's how people debate online, and it's kind of silly. But the flack, I've been dealing with it for a while. It is what it is, It's a sad state, but it is what it is.
Watch more podcast clips now on our YouTube channel. Go to Livewire Podcast Clips and watch more great podcast videos just like this one.